Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of our Public and International Service Advisor Training Workshop Week. My name is Carmen Mazzara. It's nice to see some of you back from yesterday, as well as to see some new faces. I serve as Executive Director of the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs, or APSIA as we call it. APSIA itself is the community for graduate schools worldwide that have shown the depth of international affairs work that they do and the professional focus of the work that they do. But I'm also so proud that we are the home of the Public and International Service Advisor Network for you all, for undergraduate and community college advisors. And our work through the PISA, as we call it, network is really to help make it easier for you to bring these wonderful issues, to bring these wonderful spaces to your students. And so if you didn't have a chance to join us for the career talk yesterday, I encourage you to check out that recording that's up on our YouTube page. And I know we're going to have a great conversation today at this moment about graduate school, and then later today about how that wonderful intersection of local and global plays out. We're joined today by 3 great representatives of APSIA institutions, and I want to thank them for their time. I also want to thank my colleague, Brittany Chor, for her wonderful organization of this workshop. Our moderator, Tracy Pintchman, not only is going to lead us through this great conversation today, but is part of a key steering committee among the PISA advisors to help make sure we continue to deliver on quality programs like this for you in that role. And finally, I want to say thank you to the organizations that make these workshops possible, particularly the Robertson Foundation for Government and our colleagues and counterparts at NASPA and APAM. So we're grateful to them for their investment, and we're grateful to all of you for spending some time with us today. This recording will also be available afterwards on the APSIA YouTube page, but as we go through, this is your great chance to bring those questions your students bring to you, or bring those things that are weighing on your mind. So please put those in the chat as we go, and we'll be sure to answer those. And finally, if you have any technical issues during the course of the webinar, please feel free to send me a message or Brittany a message, and we'll do our best to take care of you. With that, I'm done. Tracy, welcome and thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Welcome to everybody who's here today for our session on comparing graduate degrees and mapping financial aid. Here to help us with those issues today are 3 fabulous panelists: Zach Marentay, admissions officer at the University of Michigan, Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy; Kathryn Meyer, director of admissions and recruitment at Texas A&M University, Bush School of Government and Public Service; and Michal, Sela, head of admissions at the Geneva Graduate Institute. So welcome to all of you, and thank you. A couple of remarks about housekeeping. I want to thank you all for being here today. We're going to begin with a discussion among our panelists, and we will leave time for questions toward the end of our session. I would ask that all attendees please mute their microphones as you have done. You are certainly welcome to turn on your cameras, but the microphones should stay muted until the end of the Q&A session that I will engage in with our panelists. Please type any questions that you might have for the panelists into the chat box so we can attend to those either during the conversation that we're about to have or toward the end of the session. I invite you all also to look at the fuller biographies of our panelists, which are in the published program that you have received. So I will begin by just asking some questions of our panelists and asking anybody who wants to start first to go ahead and chime in. There are a lot of different kinds of graduate degrees out there. What are the primary differences between, for example, public policy, public administration, and international affairs graduate degrees? How are these things different? Anybody want to lead us off? Kathryn?
Hey, I will address that because here at the Bush School, we actually offer versions of all 3 of those. So I'll start with public policy. These are mainly an area for those that are analyzing and evaluating and solving all aspects of policy. So a lot of times the students who are looking for these already have kind of a leeway into, I really want to work with education issues. I want to work with health issues, environmental. And so they're basically building up additional quant skills and how to analyze things and break it down and then relay that data back to people. Then you've got those that are being public administrators, and those are looking for careers in service or nonprofits, working with government, and maybe they're now working with people. So they're in managers, they're implementing those policies that those policy people had put together, and they're running projects, and they're resolving those important issues within the society. And then you've got international affairs, which can combine both of the efforts of the other ones, but they're doing it more at that international, bigger global scale. And they also have to have maybe an understanding of a foreign language, an understanding maybe of a particular area of the world, depending on how they want to focus on their education. And they're really working more in how to bridge that gap in making society better. Maybe again, at that federal government levels where a lot of people in ours tend to go, but it can also be the nonprofit world, the private sector. So international affairs, they just have to be good at basically both of those other aspects and combined. So there you go.
Great, thanks, Kathryn. Zach, or Michal, do you have anything to add?
I would certainly echo everything that Kathryn mentioned in terms of the primary differences between those three programs, with the caveat that at the Ford School, our flagship program is just our master's in public policy. So we don't necessarily have a specific degree within either public administration or international affairs, but that's not to say that there isn't at least some overlap, between all three of those subjects. So I think when it comes to talking with students and discerning between those three, it really gets back to, what sort of skills are the students really looking for? What sort of careers is it, that they're wanting to pursue, within public policy, as Kathryn mentioned, it's much more so about sort of that research, that analysis of these various policies, rules set at the governmental level. So that could be a little bit more behind the scenes work, but the influence and the impact that students have in those careers can be very grand in scale. Public administration, we think about more so in sort of that leadership, that management type of role. So if that is something that students might be interested in potentially after already being in a policy field or a related field and are looking to, sort of move up the ladder, if you will, within those organizations they're a part of. That's, I think, a great place where public administration can come into play. And then, in international affairs, I think pretty self-explanatory, sort of that cooperation between various countries when it comes to trade, communication, economics, all of those different things. So I know we'll get into some more questions that sort of will hopefully help to guide you all in terms of how to talk to students about those differences and what sort of things they should be asking about when discerning between those different degree programs.
Thank you, Zach. Michal?
Yeah, so our perspective is really quite different. We do not offer a policy or an administration training program. So our approach is really international affairs. And we take a disciplinary approach to that. So whether you're coming at it from anthropology and sociology or from international relations and political science and so on and so forth, or economics or whatever. And for us, I think you need to take even one more step back for the global kind of zoom out. So for the Geneva Graduate Institute, everything that we do is really from a global governance viewpoint. We're not training students to work for any government, to be in the foreign service or in the public administration of any one country. Our students are really interested in the international global governance structures. That's the United Nations, that's multi-stakeholder, multinational organizations, World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, International Labor Office, and so on and so forth. I could rattle them off. And so it is policy, very much so, and it is the quantitative and the analytical skills to analyze things, but at that level. So it's worldwide policies. So if we're talking about economics, it's about economic policy, but at that level. So it's not even necessarily, we don't have any program that focuses specifically on a geographic region. We don't have Middle Eastern studies or anything like that. But of course, all the regions of the world show up in many of our courses. So it's really just a different approach, a different viewpoint that we're taking.
Great, thank you. Which leads me to my next question, which is, why should students choose programs in the areas in which your institutions offer graduate programs? Could they, for example, do the same thing with a degree in law or business? How do these programs help students when it comes to professions and careers in ways that other degrees don't. Should we go in reverse order? Michal, do you want to start
Sure,
off?
I'll tackle that one. Let me see what I can do here. So I might take a slightly non-traditional view, and I say that actually students first of all go into these kinds of programs because they have a very, very strong ideological or emotional even, or a need to make some change in the world. They're looking around them, they have heightened awareness of what's going on. Our students are not students who are not aware. These are the students who are very much, so different people do different things. So, they're not spending time in a lab or whatever, looking at something very micro. They're looking very, very macro, and they have developed a very heightened awareness of what's going on in the world around them. And they want to develop the ability to influence that. Can they have that influence through the business world? Of course they can. Can they have that influence through the legal track? Of course they can. In fact, we teach an MA program in international law, and we have the whole Geneva Academy of Humanitarian and International Law. So yes, very much so. But again, these are slightly narrower disciplinary prisms to look at those issues. So if you want to open it up, and if you want to take a larger view and really, again, do that zoom out, then the degree in international affairs and international relations and development studies probably is a better way to do that, because you're not, as soon as you choose a discipline that's a little bit narrower, you're looking at theories, you're looking at practice, you're looking at methodologies that are specific to that discipline. Whereas I think the approach of international affairs, again, is wider and doesn't kind of, I don't want to say haul you in, because I don't want to make it sound like our disciplinary students have a narrow mind. They don't. But I think you'll get what I mean. So the international affairs just takes a wider angle.
Great, thank you. Zach, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Michal shared there. I think one of the things that we talk about here at the Ford School at the University of Michigan is serving the public good, right? All of our students, and it's embedded really within the school's mission, from the very top, is that the students within our programs, really have sort of that altruistic view and trying to enact these sorts of policies that are going to create positive change within society. And as Michal mentioned, it's not to say you can't do it with a law degree, or that you can't do it within a business degree. But I think how we talk about it is that it's not the focus of those degree programs. Yes, you can go into a law profession that will in some capacity serve the public good. Same goes for business as well. But I think there's a difference in terms of how our students are learning when the actual focus of the degree and the career field itself is, enacting that sort of positive societal change. So, when we're looking at various career opportunities, our students will go into a variety of different avenues in order to do that, whether it is in nonprofit, whether it is in government work, or even in the private sector. We've seen more students going that route as well. And so there's a variety of different ways in which to do it, and policy, I think, affects a much wider range of different areas than I would say law or business does. And so I think that there are obviously pros and cons each way, but I think the really the focus of the degree program and really keeping in mind that sort of that altruistic, that positive societal change, that's really the message that we send to our prospective and our current students and our graduates all the way through.
Great, thank you. Kathryn, did you want to add anything?
The only thing I'll add is we do have students traditionally more along the lines of the law focus that are also looking at our international affairs or MPP, MPA. I don't get so much business. They kind of know what they're doing with leading in business and so forth. But really with that law, what it comes down to is how much change they want to make versus the analysis, because they're going to get the analysis in our programs too. It's really, do you want to practice law and attend a 3-year law degree that has a lot bigger price tag on it? And if you are going into law, then you may be able to pay that back in a certain number of years. If you're getting that law degree and then decide to go into public service, it may take a little longer to pay that degree back. So our degrees a lot of times make more sense for the MPA and the international affairs if they think they want to impact society but not practice law. Anyway, just more cost effective ultimately.
Great, sure, that makes very good sense. So let's talk for a second about that student who comes to you and they want to do something positive in the world. They want to have a kind of an impact that is not necessarily the case for many of your other students who come to you. You're their advisor. And they say, I don't know what graduate program to choose. They're looking at all three of your graduate schools. And they say, they all look fabulous. How do you guide that student? What question do you as an advisor, what kinds of questions would you ask that student? And what would you direct that student to ask themselves in making that decision about where to put their energy for graduate school? Should we start?
Yeah, I can start with that one. Yeah, switch up the order a little bit there.
Still the order. Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a few things that I'd want to ascertain from this student. First would be, what is sort of their area of interest? I think that's really going to, help determine sort of what pathway they go on between these various programs. And again, we just have the public policy program at the University of Michigan, but within that program, we do have a couple of concentrations that are embedded with our curriculum that are more internationally focused. So the international affairs piece is still there, despite not being a standalone graduate degree program. So learning a little bit more about what it is, what sort of field that they're interested in, and then that, sort of building off of that, what is sort of the focus of their degree, and what sort of career are they looking for, right? We view, at least in my estimation, a lot of these degrees in higher education as a pathway to the career that a student is hoping to gain. And so what sort of work is the student trying to go into? What sort of field do they see themselves in, whether it's on the domestic or the international stage? Are you looking sort of more locally at the state level, federal level? Are you interested more so in nonprofit work, consulting in the private sector? Trying to ascertain what exactly it is that the field that they want to go into, and B, the specific work that they want to do within their career. I think those are the types of questions that I would want to ask a student in order to point them in the right direction as to, yes, I think, the University of Michigan has, an MPP program that would be a great fit for you based on what you want to go into. Or conversely, our program might not be the best fit for you, but there are other options amongst, several of the member APSIA schools that would, fit a little bit better in terms of the specific focus area and the types of career that you're hoping to pursue.
Great, thank you. Kathryn, did you want to have anything to add?
I think more on that, ascertaining what they want to do also includes things like the kind of jobs they may want to fulfill, the salaries and expectation, having them do a little bit of legwork and understanding that public service doesn't mean that you're making $20,000 a year or $40,000. There are people making a very nice living as city managers of groups and working in the federal government and working their way up that pay scale. They are getting some additional benefits of like health and other areas. So there's a lot of good things out there that they need to do some research through online searches by talking to people in that field and really just getting an idea of what they want their life to be. Now, it is about money and public service. I mean, yeah, you can make some decent money, but it's more about giving back and that impact. And so they're looking for the right kinds of students for those kinds of different areas of public service versus I want to do it domestically, internationally. So the students have to inventory what their interests are. And then once they found out, again, all these choices and all these different schools, finding out what fits right. And sometimes that's visiting the schools, that's talking to the students, that's really digging down into the kind of curriculum you're taking and looking at their career services and seeing what kind of jobs they can get from there. And many times there's not a wrong choice. They may have 5 good choices and it's just a choice. Maybe funding helps with that.
I imagine it probably does for many students, that's for sure. Michal, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think we're a little bit different in that sense because for us, it's a little bit of a wider angle. So when we're looking at profiles of applicants, we really have 2 typical profiles that we're looking at. For the disciplinary programs, we're looking for students who have a very strong disciplinary background. So they know the field, they know the main theories, they know the major debates, they know something about the methodology. They don't have to have a previous degree with that same title, but they need to at least have been exposed to some courses. We don't expect them to be beginners when they arrive in the graduate program in that particular discipline. So the academic rigor and the methodological and the research component for us is very, very strong. On the other hand, our interdisciplinary program is really that. So here we have a much wider range of backgrounds. And I would say that in all of our programs, we're looking for students, and this is a little bit intangible, so it's a little difficult to translate this into concrete advice and do's and don'ts. We're looking for students who have the ability and the curiosity to navigate multiple viewpoints, multiple disciplinary approaches, and multiple perspectives, even and particularly when they are different from theirs. So we have 1,000 students, they come from 100 different countries, and only 15% are domestic. So when you sit around the classroom with us and talk about things like religion and money and politics, all the taboos, you're going to hear narratives that you perhaps have not been accustomed to hear. And how are you going to navigate that? Because when you go to sit in some international governance organization or NGO or whatever, that's exactly what you will be needing to do. So that's the training, and that's the profile of students that we're looking for. So students who are extremely formatted by their previous, university, by their previous academic or other culture, probably are going to struggle a little bit more at a school like ours. So I think I join my colleagues, do the research about the school, the nature of the school. It's not just the credits and the structure of the degree program. It's also, what is the culture over there? What's the environment, right? I mean, with us, you're smack in the middle of international Geneva, which is an international diplomatic hub. And it's a daily confrontation with things that are new and different. And so that is a whole other experience. And so how are students prepared emotionally and I would say even psychologically in a way to cope with that kind of experiential opening up, I guess.
That's very interesting, Michal, because you mentioned, you call our attention rightly to the point that not only are programs different in terms of focus and in terms of interest, but institutions are different, and they do have different institutional cultures. And so that's something that both advisors and potential candidates for the graduate programs would need to investigate and find out more about. Thank you, Michal, also for anticipating my next question, which is about the candidates themselves, the students themselves. So you have a student who comes to you, doesn't really know what direction they want to go in. So the advisors can say, okay, research these programs. Here are the kinds of questions you need to ask, the kinds of things that you just summarized for us, both for the advisors and the students. Let's say a student is really excited about 2 or 3 different programs, and they're all a good fit because, as Kathryn noted, there's not just one school, right? That's the perfect fit. How does the student prepare him or herself or themselves for the program? What are you all looking for, or graduate students, graduate schools in general, looking for when they look at candidates? And then how do advisors play a role in that? What can advisors tell the students to do to prepare themselves best for graduate programs in your areas? Zach, do you want to start us off?
Sure can. I think when we're looking at candidates for our Master of Public Policy program, there's a few different areas that we're going to evaluate in a student's application. So of course, first is academics, and when it comes to academics, we're going to be looking at everything from their overall GPA, their subject specific GPA. We're going to be looking at the types of courses that they took while they were a student there. We are one of the schools that does still require the GRE for entrance as well, and so the academic component, I think that's pretty standard. The requirements may change based on which program or which school that you're looking into, but always best to recommend that students are well aware so that they can prepare well ahead of time, not just say a few weeks or even a few months before that application deadline. Always good to look at things even a few years out to make sure that you're giving yourself yourself enough time to potentially take the courses that graduate schools are going to be looking for. I know given our program is a bit more quantitative in nature, we really like to see courses such as economics and statistics or calculus within the undergraduate curriculum. So being able to plan that out, even a few years ahead of time, always good for students to start early when it comes to preparation from an academic standpoint. Another pillar that we're going to be looking at is your involvement outside of the classroom. And this varies widely based on where the student is, in terms of what year that they're at and what their interests are. If a student does have relevant policy experiences, either through professional work experience or through internships, that's a plus for us. But it's not a requirement, right? We value sort of that diversity of background that our students are coming in with. And we've got, anywhere from students who have been in the field for 10, 15 plus years to those who are just coming out of undergrad. So, this can look in a lot of different ways. Maybe it's extracurricular involvement at the undergraduate or even the graduate level. It could be volunteering work that they've done within their community. Even if some of those things aren't necessarily directly policy related, a lot of the transferable skills that students would gain from their participation in those activities can also lend itself well to an application to a graduate program in one of these fields. And then the last piece I would say are those essays. I know a lot of, most, I would say, of our graduate programs and graduate programs across the country will require some sort of essay or written statement of sorts. And I always implore students to spend a significant amount of time on those essays. As admissions representatives, when we're looking through applications, there's, so much that we can glean from a student's transcript and from their resume. So the essays are really the best chance for you to tell us a little bit about yourself. And that can, lend itself to not only showing that personal side of you, but also give us a better indication as to whether we believe that our program and our school would be a good fit for you based on what it is that we're ultimately looking for. And so from the advisor point of view, as you're talking to students, certainly making sure that they're aware of, if they have a few programs in mind, what the, sort of minute differences might be between the admissions requirements for those programs to make sure that they're taking the right classes or, involved in the right sort of extracurriculars or organizations that those students are going to be looking for in order to better prepare themselves to be showcased as a greater candidate for admission for those programs of interest.
Great, thank you. Kathryn, did you have anything you wanted to add?
It's pretty thorough. Thanks, Zach. I didn't have much to add to that. The only other one that I wanted to say is I know there's certain classes here at the undergraduate level, particularly international affairs. They require students to attend certain speaking events because they're trying to enlighten them, to listen to other guest speakers, hear what other options exist out there for research or for certain career fields. So anytime students can challenge themselves to be a part of something, if that's not organizations, which is great, we do want that, being a leader in those organizations, but also attending events and being actively engaged with that, maybe challenging yourself to ask a question of the speaker. I think that also can open up that discussion and start thinking about things they had never thought about.
Great, thank you. Michal, you're over in Switzerland. Do things look different there?
They do a little bit. Of course, we're going to look at transcripts. We're going to look at the academic preparation. I think I covered that before. Remember that for us, we're coming at it from a slightly different viewpoint because our students are so diverse already. So if you have a student who's thinking, how do I stand out from the crowd here? You may very well stand out from the crowd for us, from our application pool, right? Because whatever it is that you think is kind of ordinary in your environment is really different over here. For example, the extracurricular activities, that's not typically something that you see in a lot of other cultures. There may not be the opportunities to do so, etc. So developing leadership skills or whatever, students just don't have, those opportunities in a lot of other countries. So just by doing something, you already are standing out from the crowd, even though you may not have reached captain of the team or whatever. So in yours, compared to people like you, maybe it's not so different, but for us it is. So just keep in mind that we're using slightly different yardsticks to evaluate some of those things. Probably for similar reasons, we also don't have a requirement for foreign language. We will teach students French. We're in a Francophone city, but we don't need, on average, our students already speak about 4 languages each between them. So we don't, that's just not something that we require. And if somebody only speaks English, that's absolutely fine as well. We just want them to speak really good English. That's our struggle. So your students won't have any problem with that. They do need to be good writers, of course. And likewise, we don't require work experience either. Again, like I said before, work experience can mean everything or very little. It's more the personal journey, the personal trajectory and personal development that will make the difference. And in our view, students can develop that experiential readiness and resilience in many, many different ways, not necessarily by getting a job or whatever. I do want to mention something that is doesn't show up in our admission requirements, but is kind of close to our hearts, all of us who are dealing with students and teaching them, etc. There are non-academic, admission things that probably should show up on the list on the checklist, but don't. Things like resilience, things like having a good support group, things like having had challenging experiences in the past, and how did you cope with them? Things like that. Being a good communicator, having influence, or having leadership, or understanding, having an awareness of your place among your peers in society. Not everybody is a leader, and that's okay. We don't test for those things in the admission process, but I want to say, if you're sending a student across the ocean to study in a program like ours, that is very different, very niche, extremely diverse, challenging in many, many ways that perhaps your previous experience has not exposed you to, then those common things that are kind of humanly universal will really make a difference. So it's the cross-cultural experience. It's how do you fit in with people that, all have different codes and norms, because they all come from such different places and cultures. Where do you find commonalities? How do you make friends, and how do you collaborate in a team group with those people on a project? So any way that you can have those experiences of the student's story shine through their applications, through the writing piece, etc., will be extremely beneficial.
Thank you, Michal. Yeah, it sounds like very different kinds of requirements depending on, again, the culture of the institution and the type of program. And so advisors would do well to inform themselves, and students would do well to really inform themselves about those cultures, and perhaps even reach out ahead of time to find out what kinds of students, what kind of student qualities should be highlighted on the application. I want to ask one more question just about schools and graduate programs in general, and then I want to ask a question about financial aid, because we're running up against our clock. I wanted to ask you in terms of location. So Michal, you had mentioned this, obviously you're in Geneva. To what extent, especially for those programs here in the US, does location matter for the schools? Do schools, for example, in DC have an advantage over other kinds of schools, or does that matter not at all? Kathryn, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I hit the school in Texas. That's really far away from DC.
didn't mean to be too obvious, but
okay, so again, here at the Bush School, we offer both a Master of Public Service and Administration, which can focus on management or policy, and a Master of International Affairs. So we in Texas are on the main College Station campus, and our students are bringing, they're getting their expertise, they're learning from the faculty. They can do that at every location. The benefit of someone being in DC versus here all comes down to whether they want to work part-time or have an internship or something like that. But keep in mind, we have built-in internships over the summer. So the students can go do that in between the year, the spring and the fall, doing courses, and go do that there, come back, finish up, then go pay that higher price tag, then go make those connections along the way, because our career services office is already bringing in those different speakers from the different employer sectors and giving them some highlights and so forth. So yeah, while there's some advantage, and there's some people who just absolutely tell us, look, I got admitted to both you and this DC school, and I really feel like my dream has been to be in DC. And we say, okay, if that's it, you're going to have to go do that, right? I can't convince you otherwise. but sometimes that price tag should. So we can give a lot of the amenities. We can definitely give them an education that is going to get them moving places. But the cost of living there is a lot different than living in Texas. And so the price tag coming from a private university in DC, or even a public one in DC, is going to be different than a public university like us in the Ford School, where we really do have affordability and scholarships and non-resident waivers and things that can make this an option so that people can go into the fields of their choice when they graduate and not feel like they have to go for the highest paying job in the private sector and not pursue their passion because they're burdened. So there's aspects of this. It's a trade-off. It truly is. No, we are not in a major metropolitan area. We're not. I can't pretend that we are. But you're going to get a lot of that professional development and exposure in a program like this because we are a major university with a lot of connections and a lot of extras that other schools wouldn't give, including SEC football and other fun things that some schools don't have. And some students want that because they didn't have it for undergrad. So it's just, again, what's important to them? How can they mix elements of that and find the program of their liking? Yeah.
Thank you, Kathryn. Zach, did you have anything to say about that?
I sure do. And if we want to pivot to football, the #2 ranked team in the country currently resides in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So just throwing it out there to all in good fun. I think everything that Kathryn says resonates, wholeheartedly with, kind of what, our approach is here at the Ford School at the University of Michigan. We're not in DC. Ann Arbor is a small Midwestern town. We are not a state capital. If you want to, serve on the Ann Arbor Board of Regents, boy, is this a perfect place for you. But, by and large, we know that a lot of students are attracted, to those larger metro areas, to DC. And so I think, when we're talking to students about it, a lot of it does come down to personal preference and what exactly it is that they're looking for. And I think that conversation varies depending on where the student is at. If the student is maybe getting ready to graduate from undergrad, and when they're sort of looking at grad schools, maybe looking at career options, and they have already kind of made it up in their head that they're going to be moving elsewhere around the country, I think that's a pretty easy selling point to say, hey, you can come get your graduate degree here at the University of Michigan, spend 2 years here, and then you can go and and do your career wherever it is that you want to. I think it's a much more difficult conversation for those folks who maybe are already rooted in DC. Perhaps they're a little bit older, perhaps they have families to consider as well. And so if they've been in the field and working professionally for 5, maybe 10 years, and now the question is, well, do I uproot my entire family, to move and try and find, housing and childcare and all these different things while I'm a part of this graduate program? I think that conversation is very different. So I think a lot of it really does come down to where the student is kind of at, both academically and personally within their own lives. And so, do we look at not being in DC or not being in a big metro area as a detriment? I wouldn't say that we look at it that way, but I think there is, often that sense from the students that, yes, that is something that's desirable. And we certainly understand that. We just also feel as though there are other things that, despite, that being lacking here at Michigan or at A&M or some of these other, public institutions, there are other things that make up for it. The quality of the education that you'll get at the Ford School will be top notch. The resources that are going to be available to you at a large research university like the University of Michigan is really something that you may not find at some of the smaller schools, private schools that you might find in DC or otherwise. The community is one of the things we really love to shine. It really is something that I think sort of sets us apart. And so there's other things that that I think would draw a student to the Ford School, despite the fact that we might not be in quote unquote a desirable location. But let me tell you, I've lived in Ann Arbor my whole life. It's a wonderful place to be if you can handle the cold.
I live in Chicago, so you've got nothing on us.
You get it.
If Carmen will indulge us just a few more minutes, I wanted to ask one last question. And Michal, I'd invite you to start us off because you can speak to this question also about what Geneva has to offer because of its location. But I also want to dovetail that in with the last question, which comes to the issue of financial aid and financing for education. So Michal, I wonder if you could cover both of those. In the United States, we have public service loan forgiveness. What do students need to know about qualifying for that? When does it make sense for students to take on debt? When does it not make sense for students to take on debt? And what would be a reasonable debt to salary ratio that students should be aware of if they are considering on taking on loans? So Michal, I invite you to start us off.
Unfortunately, I can't speak to your last questions because that debt forgiveness program doesn't apply here as well. Debt is not something that happens in Switzerland at all. So higher education is almost free, to say. Not at the institute. Our tuition is 8,000 per year for a 2-year MA program. So to people in the US, that sounds like it's almost free, but to Swiss people, that is absolutely ridiculously scandalous. The cost of living in Geneva is high. Kathryn, I think we had this conversation one time when we tried to compare costs, and I thought Geneva was going to be like 10 times more expensive than Texas, and it isn't. So cost of living is about 20K per year. That's on the low side. So that's if you're living frugally, right? So it's 8K in tuition and about 20K minimum for living expenses for a 10-month academic year. So just know that. Now, students are expected to do that without debt. In fact, they need to document the availability of funds in order to get the visa to come to Switzerland. So if they're taking out a loan to finance that, they're doing so in their home country, and we do have students who do that before they come to us. But once they get here, they are expected to have those funds. Now, financial aid we do have. We're not completely out in the dark on that. So about 10 to 15% of our new incoming master program class every year, which is about 500 students or so, a little bit less, 400 and something, is eligible for some financial aid. And so financial aid can come in the form of tuition reduction, or it can be combined, or they can also access scholarships. So a scholarship is really just a grant. It's money in hand to offset the cost of living in Geneva. A full scholarship is 20K per year, and a half scholarship is 10K, half of that. So that's the situation over here. And the evaluation is first and foremost need-based and then academic merit. And once the algorithm does its magic with those two factors, we also correct a little bit for diversity.
Great, thank you. Sadly, usually graduate school costs a lot more in the United States than 8,000 a year. So I'm wondering if Zach and Kathryn have anything to add, especially regarding the public service loan forgiveness program, and also when it makes sense for students to take on debt, looking at their future salary, the salary to debt ratio, and all of that.
I was just going to go ahead and talk for a second about the public service loan forgiveness, because that's, again, part of our name is public service. So this has always been an element that students want to know about. So we cover this when we do our financial aid and talking about scholarships and loans and things. So public service loan forgiveness. Now, keep in mind, Biden has done a lot of work during his presidency to clean up the language, because a lot of times people were working for many years in a field that should have qualified for public service loan forgiveness. And because they didn't document correctly, they didn't get credit for it. And then they got frustrated and they were paying a lot longer than they should have. So I know I read an article even this morning that talked about how many thousands of dollars, well, thousands of people, but it was millions to billions of dollars of forgiveness. But public service loan is in place for those that are working with direct loans, and they've made 120 qualifying payments. So after 10 years, as long as they have hit those payments and done them, then and documented it, right, that they can get forgiveness for the rest of that loan. So some of those employers are people who are in the military, those are in public schools teaching, national and international service participation, for instance, people with AmeriCorps or Peace Corps. So there's a lot of qualifying areas that people can get forgiveness for it, and it is still going. And then the other one that kind of goes along with that or next to that is that income-based repayments and being able to make a certain number of payments. And then they're forgiven after 20 to 25 years of making payments. So that is a way that some people can take out some loans and get some of that forgiven after, a lot of years. But other than that, just keep in mind, There are scholarships that are often given from the school department itself, and we give that out just by people applying. And so they can qualify for scholarships. Those that are out of state for us can also qualify for those non-resident waivers to make it more affordable. So there's lots of free money out there through those scholarships and waivers before someone has to resort to filling out FAFSA and doing their loans and taking all that on. They can also look for part-time jobs. What is the amount of how much debt to take on? God, that's hard. I know, just to give our numbers, we run $13,500 per year before the scholarship kicks in for Texas residents. And then once we give the non-resident waiver, it's close to that same amount. So once they get scholarships, we're closer to around that 8,000, or they may not have any tuition to pay, depending on how big the scholarship was. So GA positions, working as graduate assistants, some schools have TAs where they can teach. All those play a part in how much ratio. So living costs here are about that $20,000 as well. So I want to say on average, from what I've heard, and I've worked here a long time, is probably most of our students are somewhere between that 15 to 40,000 in debt. And that to them is doable. It's the excessive where people are taking 80 to 100,000 and over, that becomes, wow, how do you expect to pay that off in any certain increment? That's not going to really impede your ability to get a car and a house and pay for childcare when that comes. So again, I don't really know what that debt ratio is. I don't work with that specifically, but I would say most of ours are somewhere between 15 and 30, but I've heard up to 40.
And I'll piggyback off of that as well and say that it can often be a difficult conversation, I think, especially at a place like Michigan, where our programs are going to be more expensive. And as a public institution, if you're either an out-of-state or an international student, it's going to be that much more expensive. You know, we don't hide behind the numbers by any means, but it's a very important factor. And I think in conversations with students, I would say probably the most important factor when it comes to choosing which graduate institution to attend. And so for us, if you're looking at in-state tuition per year is around the 30,000 mark. For out-of-state, it's about 50,000 for a 2-year program. That could be upwards of 100,000. Now, yes, we do have some scholarships that are available, and I think it's really important to have these types of conversations with students and encourage them to have those conversations with us, because each institution is going to be very different in terms of what their sort of policies are. You know, for us, we do have a merit-based aid that we're able to award directly from the Ford School. Those often come in either quarter or half fellowship that will cover, you know, that portion of their tuition. So that can certainly bring that down, but it's not necessarily guaranteed by any means. And the other thing that's kind of working against us is residency within the state of Michigan. It's set at the university level. The university registrar is very stringent when it comes to those policies. So I'll get questions from students say, "Oh, well, I'll be here for a year and then I'll switch over to in-state." Not how it works, according to our registrar. And so it's important for students to have these conversations with each of the various admissions or financial aid departments because of how different those processes can be, to make sure that they, you know, have a full understanding of what that sort of picture is going to look like. You know, if a student is really interested in working in a field that may not have as high paying job, maybe they're looking more so in the nonprofit sector, for instance, but they're an out-of-state student looking at $100,000 in loans. I personally, as much as I work for the university, I recruit for the Ford School, I can't in good conscience tell you that this is going to be, you know, a good financial decision for you in the long run. And so that's why finances are such an important part of, you know, determining where it is that a student does ultimately end up going. And so can't stress enough how important it is for students to have those conversations with the representatives at each of the schools that they're considering. So even though we're not able to promise or guarantee anything up front in terms of what their financial package might look like in most cases, we can at least give them a realistic expectation based on the program they're interested in, you know, and what they can sort of foresee in terms of that financial hit, and, you know, what sort of that trade-off is if, you know, a program might be more expensive, how you can sort of offset that, whether it's through fellowships, external funding, you know, through loans, or student employment opportunities.
Thank you. Yes, finances are often top of the list in terms of student concerns. So Zach Marentay, Kathryn, Meyer, and Michal, Sela, I want to thank you very much for your comments today. I found them very helpful. I do want to call attention to the chat for those of you who are attending, where our presenters have offered a whole bunch of information that you might find useful regarding their programs and where to reach out to them. And I want to thank Brittany for setting things up and Carmen for indulging us, of course, for doing all that you do, but for also allowing us to go a little more than a little over time. And I will turn over everything over to you for the last 5 minutes.
Well, the first thing I want to say is thank you to our speakers and Tracy for leading this wonderful conversation and drawing out such great wisdom. I want to invite Brittany to put a quick poll up so that our attendees can let us know how we did and help us continue to grow and shape these conversations. I also want to put in a very cheap plug for the many, many different opportunities that APSIA has throughout the year for your students to have all those conversations that our colleagues stressed. A chance to build personal relationships, to discern which programs make sense for them, to get a feel for that culture, to ask, how much is this really going to cost me? And these are especially relative to my goals in this space or that space. So we at APSIA have lots of ways to make that easier for students. We also have lots of ways for you to bring this content to your students with no lift for you. So we have video shorts, we have profiles on our schools, handouts, giveaways, all sorts of different things that you don't have to do and plan. We've already done that good work for you. So feel free to steal blatantly from the things that we've created and use them with your students as makes sense. Again, please do fill out that poll that you all see in front of you. And I look forward to welcoming you back in a few hours to our next session as part of the PISA training workshop, looking at how local and global issues connect. And I also want to flag for you tomorrow's session that's going to even more deeply explain what we at APSIA can do for you as advisors and how we can hopefully make your lives a little easier. Thank you to all of you for attending. Thank you to all of our speakers for your great session. And we can stop recording, Brittany, whenever you're ready.